Hello, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to everyone who is joining us in this live today. The theme of today's discussion are COVID-19 vaccines, because last Friday, WHO approved one more vaccine, Sinopharm vaccine, for emergency use listing in the COVID-19 pandemic. As usual, I am joined by Dr. Kate O'Brien, WHO Director for Immunization, Vaccines, and Biologicals, and Dr. Alejandro Cravioto, who is the chair of the WHO Strategic Advisory Group of Experts for Immunization, and who is a professor at the Medical University in Mexico City. Good morning, Dr. Alejandro, and good afternoon, Kate. Thank you for your time to join today. I would just use the chance to invite our viewers, if they're watching us on Twitter, to ask their questions by using the hashtag AskWHO. If you're watching us on other platforms, please leave your comments via comment section, and I will pass them to Kate and Alejandro. As I announced, the theme of today's discussion are Sinopharm and other COVID vaccines, as this vaccine is newly approved. So, Kate, maybe you can start by telling us more about this vaccine, its technology and effectiveness.
Sure, Alex, happy to do that. So this is a vaccine that uses a different platform than the other vaccines that have achieved emergency listing and recommendations from SAGE. This is a vaccine that is an inactivated whole virus vaccine to inducing from your natural immune response, your own body's immune response is to respond to this product so that your body has those immune defenses if and when you're exposed to the actual virus. Just taking the virus and eating it, so it cannot cause disease, it cannot replicate, but it still has the little spikes on the outside of the virus against which your body's immune system responds. So that's vaccine works. And it's the first of this. There are a number of products who use this strategy, but this is the first one of this strategy to achieve emergency use listing and SAGE recommendations.
Thank you, Kate. And as usual, the Strategic Advisory Group of experts have met to provide the world and governments with recommendations on how to use this vaccine. So, Alejandro, can you please explain to our viewers who are the population groups who should receive this vaccine?
Yes, of course. This vaccine is 2 doses of an intramuscular shot in the arm of this inactivated vaccine that Dr. O'Brien described so well for people who are 18 years and above. The data that we have reviewed at SAGE for people over 60 is really very scarce so far. But we know that there are 2 other studies that are being conducted at present that might give us a better idea of the immune response and the reactogenicity of people above 60 years of age. But given the information that we saw and the few people above this age that have been vaccinated, there's no reason not to recommend the vaccine for all age groups above 18 years of age. The 2 doses have to be given within a frame of 3 to 4 weeks. And the 2 doses are needed in this case to be able to achieve 14 days after the second dose a full protective effect that goes up to 79% in the clinical trials for people who have symptomatic COVID and people who have severe disease in that sense. So it is comparable to other vaccines in the sense of efficacy, and the safety profile doesn't give anything that would be worrying in the sense of its use.
Thank you, Alejandro. And do we know if this vaccine can have any side effects?
All vaccines have a side effect. There's no reason to think you can have pain in your arm, you can have a bit of fever, you can have not feeling well for a few hours or a few days. But that's a normal part that we all know because it's the way your body is responding to this antigen. So far, we haven't seen any safety concerns except for very mild type of responses. So in people who have been vaccinated with this product. It is therefore something that we continue to review, and we have asked the countries that are already using this vaccine to make sure that they have the necessary pharmacovigilance systems in place to be able to detect any long-term side effects with the use of these vaccines.
Thank you so much, Alejandro. And WHO has already approved a few vaccines before this one for emergency use listing. Kate, are there any other vaccines being under review to be added to this emergency use list?
Yes, absolutely. First of all, WHO is working with any manufacturer that has contacted WHO to have considerations for emergency use listing. The ones that we are engaging in right now, so additional products that are in rolling review, where we're in discussions with manufacturers about what data submit, or we're actually reviewing the data that they have submitted. So for example, a Sinovac product is under review. There are also discussions and review going on of the gamma levy is what I'm referring to. In addition to that, there are manufacturers, CanSino, as well as Novavax manufacturers. And we provide a spreadsheet that shows on our website that shows the progress of manufacturers along the different steps that ultimately results in an emergency use listing. So that's publicly available for people to look at. It's updated on a weekly basis, but those are some of the ones that are either with WHO by the manufacturers or under data review.
Thank you so much, Kate. And I'm seeing here questions coming in particular about Sinopharm vaccine. How about the newborns and pregnant women? Do you think that these groups could be considered for vaccination?
Alejandro, do you want to take that one?
So far, we have no studies done in pregnant women with this vaccine, but the safety profile doesn't show that it would be worrying to use it if the women, as we have said before, are at a higher risk of being infected with COVID, which we know is far more severe in a woman who's pregnant. For the time being, we recommend that they have the necessary advice from their own health providers in the sense of accessing or not the vaccine. But in general, we don't see that there's a safety issue regarding women who are pregnant or women who are lactating. In the case of children, we still have no information, and therefore the vaccine is only recommended for people 18 years and above. And it's the same for people who have other diseases. For example, those who are diabetics, those who are hypertensive, those who have massive obesity, in which case that they should be more careful about the follow-up of these vaccines, but there's no contraindication so far about the use in these other groups also. I don't know if Kate would like to add something else.
Yeah, I think those are all important points. Specifically on the issue of using this vaccine, Sinopharm, in children, just want to emphasize that the SAGE committee makes its recommendations driven by data. And we're data that has been provided by the manufacturer on use of these products in children. And so that's why the res for those 18 years and above. We don't see any reason why there would be a specific safety issue for an inactivated vaccine in children, but we really do need to wait. And I also want to emphasize that children are not the priority group for vaccination. And given that vaccines are in short supply, it's really important that regardless of what the authorization use of the vaccines from the regulators and from the EUL, what SAGE does is provides the recommendations for how to use the vaccine, especially under supply constraint. And so children are not the high priority group for the vaccines, even if and when they were to be authorized from a regulatory process. Mentioning that is that recently, in the past week, we have seen the regulatory authorization of some other COVID vaccines in Canada and the US. And I just want to emphasize that although we welcome that information and that regulation, which allow for the use of those vaccines in younger people, of the priority groups to get control of this.
Thank you, Kate, and thank you, Alejandro. Here is the next question coming from Teresa Croning, watching us on LinkedIn. If I have a reaction on a flu vaccine, shall I take this one on COVID-19, Sinopharm COVID vaccine?
In general, we have. Oh, please go ahead, Kate.
You go ahead, Alejandro. Sorry.
No.
I jumped in.
Go ahead, Kate.
So, as Alejandro has just, having a local reaction or even a systemic reaction, a vaccine is actually very common. A local reaction of your arm, redness, pain site, or even pain to lift your arm up are 1 to 2 days. This indicates that your body is starting to react to the vaccine, that your system is starting to respond. People also can have what we call systemic reactions, headache. Some people get some low-grade fever, feeling well, sort of body aches. Again, all well-recognized temporary reversible side effects from the vaccine. If you've had flu vaccine, influenza vaccine, those vaccines can also cause both these local reactions and these more full body reactions. There's no reason why your experience with the vaccine should have any impact on whether you take vaccine. When it's your turn to get vaccinated, when you're called by your health, there's enough vaccine available and you're in the priority group to vaccine, we strongly recommend that you go ahead and get vaccinated. So having had some local or even systemic reaction to the flu vaccine, unless it was an allergic reaction to something that is in the COVID vaccine, reason why you shouldn't go ahead and get vaccinated.
Thank you, Kate. Alejandro, do you have anything to add?
No, the only thing that we hope, and some studies are starting to do that, is to see if we can administer these COVID vaccines in the future together with other vaccines or at the same time of other vaccines. But those are studies that we still need to continue doing or get the results of, so that we can have a much better system of vaccination, especially of our adult population, which will probably continue to need this type of vaccines in the future.
Thank you very much, Alejandro. Some of our viewers are asking, where is the Sinopharm vaccine being used? Which countries are using this vaccine?
I can address that question. Being used in a large number of countries around the world. Over 60 countries are using product. And we do expect the expansion of the availability of the Sinopharm product to a larger number of countries, especially now that there is emergency use listing of the product. So we can, there are websites that provide the information on which specific countries are using the product, but it's being used in Latin America. It's being used in a number of regions around the world outside of China. I want to add to that.
Alejandro, do you have anything to add? We were having a bit of issues with...
I think just to finish what Kate was saying, there are about 60 countries that are using it. There are countries in the Americas, in Africa, in Asia, in the Pacific. And we have asked all of them now that the vaccine has received this EUL listing to make sure that we have the information coming back from all of them to see how the vaccine, like other vaccines, are really functioning in reality. That is the functioning stage of the feedback that we need to make sure that our recommendations are actually in accordance with reality. Sometimes we can make anything seem to work, but it's not until they're put to the test. As they say, the proof is in the pudding, in the sense of how these vaccines actually work in reality, that we have the information necessary to make sure whether these vaccines are actually having the impact that they should. So in that sense, we want the security data, we want safety data, and of course, we want effectiveness data of the vaccines as they're being used throughout the world.
Thank you so much. And we have a next question coming from Parima Davachi from Iran. Is the Sinopharm vaccine efficient against all different variants of the COVID-19 virus?
The information that the company showed us is that at least for the variants that are of concern, the B117 that started in the UK and the one circulating in South America, the B1, it does have an impact on those. There's no data so far on the other variants of concern, and we have asked the company if we're going to do the necessary studies to show whether the people that have been vaccinated also have antibodies that are able to control these variants. This is extremely important, as we have seen recently, in the sense of how these other modifications of the virus are actually impacting the use of the vaccines that we already have or the need to modify them in the future.
Thank you so much.
Maybe, Alex, I can just...
Oh, please.
Yeah, maybe I can add just a little bit on that, because this is such a common question. I know a question to people. There are really two kinds of evidence, two kinds of information that we look at to understand whether or not a variant and a product, vaccine product, are whether the variant is impacting the performance of a vaccine. The first is looking at the immune response that somebody has. So looking at the antibodies in the blood of somebody. And the second is clinical data. And that means just finding out what the vaccine actually protects against disease from the variant. And it's much easier to get information about the immune response to the variants than it is to get the clinical data. But it really is the combination of two pieces of information. And we have less information about the clinical performance of vaccines against the variants. So it's the Sinopharm vaccine. We have more information about the antibody response. I think the second point I just want to emphasize in what Alejandro said is that it's not an all or none phenomenon. It's not as if the vaccines either do work or don't work against the variants. It's not sort of like a black and white question. It's really a question, are they working sufficiently well? To expect for most vaccines and for some of the variants that there might be less impact vaccines against the variant, but there still may be adequate impact variants. So these are not black and white issues of we should stop using a vaccine in the face of an existing variant. It really is a more qualitative assessment of what is the performance and is there adequate retention of performance, that the vaccine is still a really useful vaccine protection and public health impact.
Thank you so much, Kate. And here's the next question from Ene Igran. Does the Sinopharm vaccine create immunity or does it lessen severity of symptoms?
That is such an interesting question. Let me see if I can address that. So what we do know is that the Sinopharm vaccine reduces the risk of severe cases of COVID, including the risk of hospitalization. So it certainly has an impact of protecting people against getting disease from the SARS-CoV-2 virus, and especially preventing against getting severe disease, severe enough to be hospitalized. The information about whether or not the vaccine also protects against infected and whether or not it's simply providing protection again to get disease, but doesn't protect against infection to the same degree, we don't have sufficient information about the performance of the vaccine to protect against infection, regardless of whether you have symptoms. So it's a little bit of a hard question to answer at this point. We are still very much in the phase of learning about the vaccines based on ongoing data being generated. It is that there is reduction of risk of getting infected if you're vaccinated with the Sinopharm product, but the magnitude of that is yet really to be fully quantified.
Thank you so much, Kate. And here is the next question. What are the storage conditions for Sinopharm vaccine? And are these conditions limiting supply chain in some way?
No, the benefit with this vaccine is that it can be kept just in a normal refrigerator, like we do with the influenza vaccines. That is the benefit of these inactivated vaccines, that they don't require a severe chain, a cold chain problem like the deep freezers that we need for the mRNA vaccines. So that is a huge advantage, especially in low and middle income countries that have much less facilities to be able to handle low temperature cold chain requirements.
Thank you very much. Here is a question, maybe Kate, you can address from Maurice Fernandez. Can you please elaborate use listings?
So elaborate on what it means to have an emergency use listing? Okay.
Yes.
So each country has a regulator that authorizes the use of medical products in the country. WHO is not a regulator. So WHO doesn't authorize for the use of a product in any country. However, what WHO does is it does provide a review in the same way that regulators review data on safety, efficacy, and quality of manufacturing. And this is the WHO either pre-qualification process or emergency use listing process. And what an emergency use listing is WHO's message to the world that we have reviewed the data that has been provided by the manufacturer on those three elements: safety, efficacy, and the quality of manufacturing. This includes a review of the manufacturing process. And sometimes what's necessary is an on-site review of the manufacturing of the product. And what WHO is doing is it is messaging the world that we've done a review of the evidence, and we are indicating that the quality of that evidence and the findings from that evidence meet the highest international standards. What that allows for is regulators from any country to rely on the review that WHO has done. So it facilitates the regulatory review of other countries around the world, and it supports them in their own process. It also provides procurers of vaccine. For instance, UNICEF procures hundreds of millions of doses of vaccine for low-income countries and middle-income countries around the world on an annual basis. And UNICEF will only enter into contractual agreements with manufacturers who have received emergency use listing or pre-qualification by WHO. That stamp of review, that stamp of quality that allows procurers of vaccine to have confidence in the products that they're procuring.
Thank you so much, Kate. Here is a question from Surai Limbu. How long does this vaccine protect after the second dose? Do we know?
I'm afraid that's a question that we still don't have an answer for. Not for this and for the other vaccines. We're following all of them up. We have data so far for 6 to 8 months after the initial vaccination, but that is something that is still to be determined in this long-term follow-up of the people who have been vaccinated and followed to see if the vaccine keeps on protecting them against both the presence of disease with symptoms and the presence of infection without symptoms. Those are the things that we still need to answer, which are essential for the long-term use of these vaccines once we have at least used them in the sense of control of the pandemic. I don't know if Kate would like to add anything to that.
Yeah, let me add a little bit to, I agree with everything that you said, Alejandro, and let me just add a little bit more, which is that, of course, we are only going to know about the duration of protection as time goes on sufficiently, but it doesn't mean that we don't start to have some signals about what duration of protection looks like. So for example, for some of them now have about 8 months of follow-up time from when the first individuals were vaccinated, because remember the clinical trials began a little under a year ago. So there are some people who have received, a small number of people who received this vaccine or other vaccines and have had those vaccines about a year onwards. And so following up those people to look at the antibodies in their blood is one way of starting to look at how quickly those antibodies decay over time. It's one sort of hint about what the duration of protection might start to look like. And what we are seeing for some vaccines is that there's very good retention antibodies even 6, 7, 8, 9 months since you've been vaccinated. As Alejandro said, really the proof is going to be about actually observing whether or not people who were vaccinated a year ago and eventually 2 years ago and 3 years ago, whether they are still protected against disease. So that's the kind of evidence that will be needed. We just need to let time pass in order for us to be more about how long the protection lasts.
And Kate, if I might ask you, how do these variants actually affect all these things? Are we going to need boosters specific for the variants? How do you see this happening in the long term?
Yeah, this is an area, this questions of concern that is really an open question at this point. What we're seeing with the variants, and we do have now 14 vaccines that are in use around the world. In general, the variants, the vaccines are still showing strong performance against the variants. That's a sort of overall statement. For some of the variants, in particular, the variant that was first identified in South Africa, the one that goes by the number B1351, one that we're most concerned about, it's the one where there is some slippage of the efficacy of vaccines against the variant. So this is the one we're watching most closely. But in general, this may be a reason why people need to get booster shots. So if it turns out that the performance of the vaccine against variants is less than against the non-variant strains, this might be a reason why a booster shot is needed to sort of keep boosting the immune system to retain as strong performance as possible. The second reason why those variants may require booster shots is that manufacturers are already developing a sort of some of the vaccines to be more specific to address the immune needs of to fight to protect against the variants. And so for people who have not already been vaccinated, it may be that the vaccines that you'll be offered will be ones that are adjusted to be stronger performers against the variants. And for people who have already been vaccinated, if we start to see slippage of the performance, you might need to get one more dose some period of time, a year, 3 years after the first vaccination. And that booster dose might be a product that has sort of, version 2 of the vaccines that are more specific to the variants. Again, this is yet to be determined, but the manufacturers are preparing for this if this is needed. And when I say preparing, they're adjusting their vaccines. Some of the manufacturers are adjusting the vaccines to try and be better performers against some of the variants.
Thank you so much, Kate and Alejandro, for bringing this up, because this was actually the next question I wanted to ask, coming from Amruta Desai. So Amruta got her answer already. Here is the next question, Kate, for you. Dadon Laston is asking, what is the common active ingredient in this COVID-19 vaccine?
Yes, a great question. So we'll come back to it again. So this is a whole virus inactivated vaccine. It means that the whole virus was grown in a laboratory and then it was killed so that it doesn't replicate. The active part of this vaccine, like all of the vaccines, is those spikes that are on the outside of the virus. That's what we're most interested in terms of antibodies. But because it's a whole virus vaccine, there are parts of the immune response that are responding to other components of this inactivated vaccine. And research is still going on to try to understand whether or not there are components of the immune system that are strengthened because the entirety of the inactivated virus is available for the immune system to see it. But really the most important active part are those proteins on the outside. You've seen those cartoon diagrams. It looks like the virus looks like a ball, and then there are these spikes on the outside of it. And that's the target for all of the vaccines that have been developed, including this inactivated whole virus vaccine.
Thank you so much, Kate. Here's the question again about the technology of this vaccine. Is Sinopharm vaccine using the same technology as Covaxin from India?
Do you want to take that, Alejandro? Or, yeah.
Covaxin is the Bharat vaccine. It is also an inactivated vaccine. I don't know how similar they are in the process, but it would be the same type of vaccine as Kate has described, of a whole virus that is grown in the lab and then inactivated through a different, could be the same or a different process, and then enhanced in its performance by an adjuvant, which in the case of the Sinopharm is alum or aluminum hydroxide. I do not know exactly the composition of Covaxin, but I do know that it's another inactivated vaccine, and we will soon be reviewing the data for this other vaccine in the SAGE working group that looks at this COVID-19 products.
Thank you so much. And Alejandro, I know that you mentioned at the beginning, but a few of our viewers are asking how long time should pass in between the first and second dose of this vaccine?
No more than 4 weeks. 3 to 4 weeks is the time that we have recommended for the use of this vaccine. And given that the first dose doesn't give any type of immunity, that's why you need the second dose to achieve that. We recommend that this is not extended beyond the 4 weeks as recommended by us and by the producer.
Thank you so much. And I'm seeing some questions coming in about the ingredients of vaccines, of COVID-19 vaccines. So Kate, maybe you can explain once again. We also have a series of explainers on our website. So I would invite everyone interested to read more about how different vaccines are produced to go to our website, www.who.int. You can go to COVID-19 page or just search for WHO COVID-19 vaccines. But I'm giving the floor to Kate, who is our expert to explain now as well.
Thank you. So all of the vaccines, first of all, contain some active component of the vaccine. It's the part of the vaccine that is the intended part that the immune system should respond to. So that's what we would refer to as the active part of the vaccine. In addition, and different vaccines use different strategies for how to get that component isolated and put into the vaccine. And that's when we refer to different platforms, that's what we mean. So one platform is using a whole virus inactivated or killed product. That's a platform. Other products are using a strategy where they provide the instructions to bodies to produce that target for the immune system. That's how the mRNA vaccines work. It's also how the viral vector vaccines work, where we give another virus that is harmless the instructions on producing the active part that we want the immune system to respond to. So that's the active part of the vaccine in every vaccine. But in addition to that, for the injectable vaccines, they need some liquid to sit in. And so there's a liquid part to the vaccine. There are, for some of the vaccines, what Alejandro just referred to as an adjuvant. And an adjuvant is simply, I'm going to call it a booster to the immune system. It helps the immune system recognize that active part of the vaccine and allows the immune system to have a strong action. We have adjuvants in many different vaccines that are used in routine immunization systems. So these are well-studied, are safe products. And then there are what we refer to as some residuals that are in vaccines. So when we grow viruses or we produce the active part of the system, there are tiny amounts of the way that those viruses are grown that are sometimes found in the vaccine. So again, these are in extremely small amounts in the virus. We also seen rather. And then finally, in some of the vaccines, there are stabilizers or for vaccines that are provided in vials that have multiple doses. There may be products in there that allow that vial to be kept for multiple days. So each of the products, each of the components of a vaccine are tested individually before they're mixed together in a vaccine. They're tested for safety in both animals and in humans, so that every component of what's in a vaccine has safety profile. And they are tested once they're mixed together and provided in the final vaccine, so that a safety analysis, the most important thing to anybody who's working on vaccines, the whole of the vaccine enterprise, the most important thing is the safety profile of the products. Component is tested before it's used in humans and monitored constantly, even after the product are used in routine use.
Thank you so much, Kate. And Alejandro, you explained that people shouldn't take second dose of Sinopharm vaccine longer than 4 weeks later after the first one. So some of our viewers are asking what to do if they miss that period to get their second dose.
Well, the thing is to get it as soon as possible. If you miss the 4-week period, then have the second dose as soon as the vaccine is available. But you don't need to start having another dose. I mean, that you just vaccination program. In the case of other vaccines, we have extended that period up to 12 weeks, but it depends on the product and the capacity of the first dose to give a certain amount of protection, which is not the case with these inactivated vaccines. So in a program of immunization in a country, they have to make sure that the second dose is available within the time frame, so that the people who receive the first one are actually then immunized with the second dose to be protected.
Thank you so much, Alejandro, and thank you, Kate. Maybe just the last question before we close. I'm aware of the time and your other commitments, is whether this vaccine will help us to come closer to our objective of vaccine equity. Maybe Alejandro, you can start. Oh, Kate, we got you back.
I think, is Kate back? I think the important.
Yes.
Oh yeah. About the yes, Kate, go ahead.
So
the vaccine equity question is extremely important. I think. Yeah, I think I'm here. The vaccine equity question is incredibly important. There's not enough vaccine available at this point for everyone in the world who could receive this vaccine to actually receive it. So what's extremely prioritizing who are at most risk of disease, so those who are elderly people, those with underlying medical conditions, and providing vaccine to health workers who are the ones who are caring for people who get COVID and who are working in the health system. Now, the reason that we haven't achieved that is that there are countries in the world who have a lot more vaccine to cover all of their population, or they have contracts that will cover more than their whole population, while at the same time there are many countries in the world who don't have enough vaccine to even secure the coverage of the highest priority groups. With every new manufacturer that achieves emergency use listing or has demonstrated efficacy, safety, and quality manufacturing, that's an opportunity for more manufacturing to take place and to even out the equity, the allocation of these vaccines. The way that we can try to secure global access to vaccines is the COVAX facility. COVAX is the global organized entity to procure vaccines for every country in the world, that any country that is interested. There are 191 meaning countries or economies in COVAX. COVAX has delivered over 50 million, almost 60 million doses of vaccine to over 100 participants. So the vaccines are rolling out through COVAX, but what COVAX really needs, it's secured over 2 billion doses of vaccine. COVAX needs vaccine supply now, early, and there are a number of ways that that can happen, both by manufacturers prioritizing COVAX and by countries that have a lot of doses for their own domestic use to start sharing those doses with COVAX so they can be distributed and allocated more evenly across countries around the world.
Thank you, Kate. And I would just add to that also our viewers can help us. They can also participate in the WHO Foundation campaign, gogiveone.org. And you can help us also to buy more vaccines for those who are in need and don't have access at the moment. So I would just repeat once again, gogiveone.org. Visit the website, and if you have the chance and the means to donate and help us to deliver more vaccines to people who still don't have access. And Alejandro, maybe your last words for today, and how this vaccine will help us to come closer to vaccine equity.
I think that the message is get vaccinated when you can. I think that the message is, for the time being, we need to continue keeping the other measures that we have set in place, use of a mask, washing your hands, and socially distancing, until we have enough people vaccinated in all countries to be able to control this pandemic. As long as we don't have that, we don't have a world security in that sense. And I think the Director General, Dr. Tedros, has been very clear that that's an obligation of every country in the world to see that not only themselves, but also their neighbors are safe, and we can move on from this horrible infection that has really caused a huge damage in ourselves, in our loved ones, and in our economies. And I think that the vaccines are a good complement, but they're not enough. We need to continue taking care of ourselves, and we need to continue making sure that everybody has access to these products and not just the ones that have more money to buy them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alejandro, for your time once again, and Kate, for your time as well. I'm seeing a lot of positive and thank you messages to both of you for your clear answers. And I will end with thanking all our viewers for watching us from the UK, India, France, Germany, Trinidad and Tobago, Bangladesh, Sweden, Indonesia, South Africa, Mexico, Nigeria, Ghana, Brazil, Norway, Ireland, Spain, Kenya, Canada, Nicaragua, Pakistan, Switzerland, Tanzania, Seychelles, Lebanon, Iran, and many others. Please visit our website if you would like to learn more about Sinopharm, but also other vaccines, how they work, and also if you have any other doubts or questions about how to stay safe from COVID-19, visit our website or follow our social media channels. Until next time, stay safe.